Hello, welcome back. I think we are back, and maybe you wouldn't imagine that we would come back again, because I have to admit, and you remember that I said it in the very morning, in the beginning, and said, this is an online event, it's a full online event, you never know what might happen, so there might be a little hiccup somewhere. Now, there is a sterling crew here who made everything happen so that there was no hiccup now, but after this super dynamic pitching session, we somehow ran into a dry spot, and I tell you, some of them made really nasty jokes about my name and the desert and going through the desert and so on. I will spare you all of that. While we were in this sort of desert spot and not getting back online again to all of you, I saw all the time here in the little screen in front of me, you need help, you want to join the debate, you want to continue discussing. Yes, I said, I want to continue discussing with you. I want the event to continue, and I needed help. And then help came, and we are back on. So I'm super happy that we are reaching another milestone of the SEMIC 2020 conference. Remember that I said also, I think there is no up and down or something like in conference sometimes is. It is steady top level, but always very, very different. So we had in the afternoon a presentation of the app winners or the winning apps from the EU Datathon. Then we moved to young students from all over Europe, actually half the world, who were pitching their research ideas. So from data apps to interoperability research ideas, which I think sparked a nice debate. And now we are coming to an discussion exchange session that I'm dead sure will be very animated and rich, because it is 4 eminent voices in data and interoperability that are now coming actually to you, I was about to say to your bedrooms. No, I'm saying to your screens close to you. The topic is semantics and data politics, policies. And the question is, and the challenge to these experts is, what should be the EU's priorities in that? Semantics, EU priorities. Would like to introduce you, and I think, David, are you already here with us? Can you join in?
I am.
Yes, I can hear you, and I can see you, and I can also see Heather. Hello, the two of you. We start with David, a good old friend from the Lisbon Council here in Brussels, but he is coming to us from Barcelona, as you see. I'm not sure it's a window, David, or is it just a poster? I think that's just putting a poster. It's a painting. So from beautiful Barcelona, joining us, David, an old friend from the Lisbon Council. And Heather is already in the call. Fantastic to have you both there. David is an old local hero, if I can say, in the Brussels environment, on digital government policies, on the public course in digital, on startups and on data. He was also one of the authors, and I see that it is that more folks are coming in, that's cool. He's also one of the authors, I think, behind the big Lisbon Council data and member states AI study, where the question mark for us was always AI, fantastic, the debate of the day, open data and data usage, the debate of the day, and the semantics and all of that to keep it going. Remember that we had the discussion about the plumbing throughout the day that is necessary in order to get the data flowing discreetly. I will stop talking here, and I will just hand over, please, David, to you, and to introduce yourself, the eminent, the prestigious panel that has been assembled for you. Over to you. Have good fun. Audience, you guys and girls, enjoy the debate.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Osimo. I'm everything that Max said except old. I work at the Lisbon Council, a think tank based in Brussels, and we recently carried out a fascinating study on what member states are doing with data. Max said before the break, don't fall asleep, so I want to start today with a question to you, and so you get familiar, well, you're now already familiar probably with the question tool, Slido, but I use it in reverse, so to ask you a question, everyone who is listening. Many years ago, there was a open data evangelist who said, the coolest thing to do with your data will be thought of by someone else. And my question to the audience is, have you heard of this sentence? And please add your comments into the question mark. Just say yes to get a sense of it. You know, it's just raising the hand in a live meeting. Actually, the sentence came from Rufus Pollock, who is an open data evangelist, is a hacker, should be here momentarily. And this sentence was, originally a sentence for a group of hackers and developers, but it grew into the circles of policymakers. And in fact, the idea that reuse of data matters is actually at the core of the EU data strategy. The recently published data strategy is built around the idea that the greatest economic and societal benefits of data-driven innovation lie in the secondary use of data by other actors than those who gathered it in the first place. So innovation comes from data sharing, data pooling, and reuse. And of course, this is very ambitious and challenges because it goes against what we see as the mainstream data-driven innovation, at least in the business world. So this is ambitious, it requires willingness, it requires trust, it requires common rules. And today we're going to discuss why data reuse matters and how to achieve it. And we have a fabulous panel. First, Heather Broomfield, Senior Advisors in the Resource Center for Data Sharing in the Norway Digitization Agency. We see the logo there. And she's the manager of the Open Data Portal and the Open Data Initiative in Norway. We have Ruben Verborgh, Professor of Decentralized Web Technology at Ghent University. Thanks for being here. And he's also a technology advocate for tools like Inrupt and Solid, which many of you know. We should also have Rufus Pollock, by the way, the author. Here he comes. Just as I mentioned, here we have Rufus Pollock, who is the founder of the Open Knowledge Foundation. Many of you know the Open Knowledge Foundation. It's a leading NGO on open data, and he is a pioneer of open data. And I personally used the sentence that I said at the beginning many, many times in my studies and in my presentations. So this is our panel. Of course, you have a question tool on Slido. Please use it as much as you want. We really want to keep this session interactive. And to kick off the discussion, I would like to start with a very general statement, and coming from the very diverse experience that we have lucky to have here today. So, Heather, let's start with you. How do we grow a culture and a habit of data reuse? And what is the role of semantic and interoperability in that? What did you learn from your long experience in Norway and beyond Norway?
Okay, I think I want to start off by saying that I'm not a semantics expert. I think it's very important that I, come clean about that, particularly in this hugely esteemed group of people watching a part of this conference. I'm coming at this much more from the policy perspective, and I think it would be great.
Could you raise a bit your voice? It's a bit lower, so
can
you can go closer to the mic.
Can you hear me better now? Is that better now?
Try again.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bit closer, it's better.
Okay, I'll try. I will work on this way. So, okay, so maybe I'll just start off again, just to repeat, to say that I'm not a semantics or interoperability expert. I think it's very important I come with that straight away off the bat, particularly in such an esteemed group. I'm coming at this much more from a policy perspective. And as you say, my experience with sharing of data and open data reuse, particularly in the Norwegian context, but also in the European context. So maybe if I just try to contextualize a little bit of where we're coming from in Norway, because we talk much more than just about open data. So our context is very much around, we have a very well managed high quality data in Norway. It's been collected for over 60 years now with unique identifiers. So this is personal data, so you're talking health, birth, deaths, marriages, etc., right down to your library book loans, all collected under unique personal numbers that you get either at birth or at immigration. We have registered data, so that's company data, property data, vehicles, roads, transport, etc. Then as well, we have archive data. Freedom of information is hugely important in the Norwegian context. It's really a pillar of our society. So this data is not just, it's not just decades old, it's hundreds of years old, and it's being digitalized at the moment. So vast amounts of unstructured data as well. Then on top of this, again, I suppose we have what would be called in the private sector the data exhaust, because in Norway we've been delivering digital services now for many years. So there's a data exhaust there as well in terms of behavioural data. Now, you don't need to be a genius to see the vast opportunities for reuse here, and that semantics is a key driver for this, because the user needs to know that they're understanding this data properly and getting this data shared appropriately and responsibly, because you also don't need to be a genius when you hear about the data context that we have, what a big responsibility we have going forward. Maintaining trust. Trust is a huge asset for us here in Norway, and maintaining this trust is a huge asset. Now, semantics, of course, won't solve this for us, but it's a huge contributor, let's say, to ensure that the right services are delivered to the right people at the right times. Now, what's also vital here at the moment in the Norwegian context is that this semantics, it matters now. It's not just some like distant nice to have or something on a maturity model. We actually have to solve this now. And the public sector then is, at the moment, is sharing an awful lot more data for openness, for transparency, for service delivery, and for value creation. And then semantics allows the reusers to evaluate if this is right for them. So this is about making sure that the data is used properly and in the right context. And then, of course, if we take this out of the Norwegian context and into the European level, cross-border service is hugely important for us. Single digital gateway once only has been an important principle in Norway now for many, many years. And semantics is at the heart of that. We also, there's huge work going on in terms of building our data economy. There's a white paper currently being written at the moment, actually, on the data economy and innovation. Our companies have huge potential. We can build little many companies, but with every other country in Europe, these need to be able to scale across borders. They need to be able to reach more than just national markets. So, for example, in Norway, we have 5 million inhabitants. A small market. We need to be able to scale across borders. And it's not enough that they can just access data, they also need to understand it in order to use it properly. So I think that's kind of just contextualizing where Norway is in terms of semantics, and then kind of setting it in then in the broader questions, broader context. And maybe that'll kind of be a little bit of information to bring it forward.
Excellent, many thanks. Rufus, thanks for joining. We started off with your sentence on the coolest thing with your data will be thought of by someone else, in case you missed that. So tell us a little bit what you learned from your many years and many country experience in sharing data and favoring reuse. What works, what doesn't?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think that there are a few things. So first of all, I think it's just worth looking at where we are in the kind of journey to data nirvana. So first part of that journey always is just being able to have data. And I think that we can be very kind of, there are still much still to do, whether it's in open data or whether it's not open, but just in data availability. There's still a long way to go in that journey, but there has been a lot achieved. And I don't think that that's it's not a kind of as live an issue. It's something we need to keep working on. But that kind of first part of whether it's openness or the data availability debate, I think has kind of largely been won in many ways. I think the step 2 in that journey was what you could call the data quality part of this. And which is, and I want to talk briefly here, what I would say, what I'd learn is I want to kind of distinguish quality very briefly in the sense that it can mean a multitude of things. And I think it's useful just to kind of break that down into maybe 3 levels crudely. One level would be kind of what I would call data tidiness. So many data sets that you get, they have, let's just think of it as simple as a spreadsheet, which we can all be familiar with. It turns out many of those are not tidy. It's even if they're machine readable, so we're in a digital form, they're in a spreadsheet, they're missing columns, they're missing rows, there's blank rows at the top, there's footnotes shoved in the data set. And that is, you know, and I would just say, if you still look at the quality of a lot of data online on government open data portals or internally, we do at Datopian, I'm at Open Knowledge and also the offshoot of Open Knowledge called Datopian. We do a lot of internal data management with companies, with governments and others, and the quality of internal data is in tidiness is often a big issue. Above tidiness, you would have what I'd call syntax. And the syntax is what I mean is the basic kind of information about, you know, the column in your spreadsheet. Is it a date? Is it a number? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? But you know what I mean? The basics of it that would allow you, why is that important? It would allow you to load that data automatically into something like a database or between spreadsheets in a consistent way. And it's what, for example, by the way, is missing from CSV data, for example. If people are familiar with it, it's just all strings. You don't know if it's a name or a number or a date or so on. And then we have semantics. The kind of pinnacle of the data quality is not only do we know our data is tidy, not only do we know this column is a number, but we know that this column is GDP per capita or whatever. And ultimately, I would say still, in my practical experience, and you know, when you look at these things, they're relevant. Sorry, just one point. These things are all relevant because they allow us to use tools. Why do we care about data quality? Because they allow us to basically automate some part of what we were doing manually, basically with data. And when you go and look at many organizations, I would say we're still often at stage 1 or 2 of that pyramid of the tidiness or the syntax level of that. And, you know, basic kind of errors that arise at that kind of level. I mean, just to give a very complete one that I would say is kind of tidiness or relating to tooling that has nothing to do, just recently it turned out in the UK that COVID numbers were being incorrectly reported because people used an old Excel format that was truncating the file at 56,000 rows or whatever. And you might think, oh my God, that's so dumb. And I'd be like, well, it's actually not, you know, it's not uncommon. We're doing work with the World Bank at the moment, and they're doing a lot of work automating, but, you know, a lot of data processing into quite important indicators still, you know, some parts of it are manual and are, you know, involve tidying data in basic ways. And so I think what I would say from my experience is we're in the age of data quality. I think we have made a lot of progress in many of these fronts, but I would say this basic layer of tidiness and syntax is still a big issue. And the tooling, if I were to have a kind of recommendation also to policymakers and other, I'd say focusing on that kind of tooling, the tooling for that, and the practical problems, the use cases people have is really, really essential. Like making it real, being what I call agile data, just like we have agile software. You know, it's based on user stories. It's based on iteration, rapid iteration, rather than a, you know, thing. I think is very important. And you know, that can even apply to standards. I've been in standards processes where they have like, we've got a 6-month deadline and we need to ship the standard or whatever. And that's not the way I would be, you know, just like you wouldn't build a tool very well that way. You end up with a certain kind of tool if you build tools that way versus an agile approach. So that's my initial points. I hope that's useful.
Very useful. Thanks a lot. Now let's move to Ruben. Ruben, you have an academic hat and a practitioner hat. What are the lessons that you learned?
Well, from my mini practitioner heart, it actually is that, you know, by the way, even though this is a panel, the interesting thing is that I agree with everything that has been said so far. So this might become a very boring discussion after all, or at least we'll just all happily agree with each other. But for me, as has been said, reuse is key. And importantly, it's a read-write story. Because right now, web applications are built the way that you read predictable data and mostly data you've written yourself, so you know what to expect. With reuse, it's completely different, right? It's you need to read data that you haven't written yourself. Data comes from different places, might be dirty data and so on. So the whole control and predictability is very, very different. What you see is that the way that typical applications are built today is we build the front end to the back end. Like they're often teams talking to each other, or maybe it's a public API, but predictability is what it's all about. What we want to do tomorrow is read data that other people have written. And we want to start appending data that has been written by others already. So we get a very, very different and more complex situation. Now, we've talked a bit about semantics and interop as well, but it's important that interop is something really broad. We need to talk about interoperability on the level of laws, for instance, like how does this data legally combine? How can we do reuse? We need to talk about the level of APIs, interfaces, and so on. So semantic interoperability, data level interoperability is just one of the pieces of a bigger puzzle. So let's never lose track of that. It's always a means to an end. There's a bigger picture to it. But what I think is important is also to take a step back and think about, like, okay, reuse. How are we gonna approach this in general? Because I think there's two kind of assumptions that you can have in general. Like, there's the school of thought that says there will be one day in which the whole world agrees on the same data model. The other school of thought says there will never be such a world. So either we have to put our efforts in making sure that everybody has the one true data model, or we should put our efforts in accepting that this will never exist, and how can we keep on readjusting, reshaping data, so like have a constant integration, basically. And I personally think that we're heading towards the second world in any case. Like, as soon as a project goes large, there will never be agreement. It's the wide world, you know. So I think we need to prepare on reading data in different formats, and instead of trying to have this mythical one format, let's see how we can more flexibly reshape data between formats. And if we do that, if we want to reshape data, this is where semantics come into me. Like, either we go back 20 years and we have XML to XML translations with XSLT, and we make point-to-point translations, or we add semantics. And semantics are kind of a common understanding of data, and if we have that, it's easier to move from one shape to the other. So in preparing for a world in which there will never be one true data model, semantics can be the lingua franca, basically, that makes it easy to translate from one kind of data to another. But it requires a mindset to be prepared for that. And to me, if you want to reuse, you need to have this as a default mindset, because data will never be the format that you expect. So basically, long story short, heterogeneity, constant integration, and semantics are good as a glue, but that's not the whole story. We need to look at legal interoperability, interface interoperability, and so on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We are only a bit short of time because we started late. By the way, I asked the organizer to tell me what time we should finish exactly. But let's go more concrete now. Let's take the advantage of your brains to help the European Commission designing these data spaces, 9 data spaces that are in the production, that are planned as part of the EU data strategy. And let's look in particular at issues like data quality. You all mentioned the importance of it. And here I mentioned one question that we just received. How develop project and toolkit for data quality assessments? How do we help data quality become a reality? And we have some requests from the member states in this sense. Now, the issue is, take the data spaces. We are right at the beginning of the design. How do we make sure that they're designed in a way that maximizes reuse and data quality across Europe and across sector? And maybe, Ether, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, again, I mean, these data spaces are very exciting. For us here in Norway as well. I mean, I suppose maybe if we start with something like a little bit concrete, and maybe again, in Norway we have, in our data catalogue, it's not just about open data, it's also an API catalogue, it's an information model catalogue, but it's also a concept catalogue. So we're working on that, and we'd like to see that maybe the EU data spaces could also think of that from the very beginning as well. In terms of quality, what we would say I suppose in Norway is, and we're very clear on that, is to be open about the quality. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here either. So we also need to be open about the quality of the data as we open it. So don't let it stop us from sharing the data, because quality is also about fit for purpose. So, for example, we use the example here that if an ambulance needs to go to a house to collect, so obviously that needs to be perfect quality data. It has to be completely accurate. But if we're trying to predict, let's say, movements, patterns, maybe it doesn't need to be as good quality. So it's about being open about the quality, sharing the quality, and also at the same time working very hard on the level of the quality. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And it's something, actually, this is from the Shakespeare report from many years ago from the UK, where they said this is twin track, right? Have to be twin track all the time, thinking, yes, we need to get this really good quality data, but at the same time, we can't let that stop us sharing. So there's that balance that needs to be struck there, which is easier said than done.
Yes, and it's clear that we won't get all the solutions here, but it's part of an ongoing discussion that we should keep having while we design these data spaces. Rufus, what is your take on that? What are your key messages for building effective data spaces?
Also, it's really good. This one comment also at the beginning, which is there's kind of a quality that also Heather mentioned. There's quality like, is the data actually accurate? And there's what I'm almost calling technical quality. Like, is the data consumable by a computer or by tools relatively easily, or by a programmer using tools? What are the comments? So one I say is that in terms of it, it's like, you got to be able to, if you're not kind of testing or assessing quality, you're not going to drive quality in any way. So you got to have something on that. This comes back to my point, which is tidiness and syntax are kind of, at least for me, machine checkable, right? But it's difficult for a machine to know, like, is this GDP per capita? But it's relatively easy to say that this column is a number and to check whether it's a number, you know, whether in fact this column has ABC in it rather than one or a 2 or a 3. And one thing we spent a lot of time at Open Knowledge and Datopia over the last 15 years actually is a kind of a stack called frictionless data. And frictionless data it's intentionally, it's not semantics. You can plug semantics in, but it's just syntax, and it's just tidiness, and it's mainly tools. That's the other thing I'm going to say is, forget standards to some extent. You know, like I love RFCs, rough consensus and running code. you know, I've seen specs written that you couldn't write and implement a validator for. That is not a useful spec, or it would take a PhD to write it, you know, to write that validator. You know, like rough consensus and running code. And that's one of the things, particularly on frictionless, we spend a lot of effort for is the tooling in that regard. And so to come back, like certain ideas, and all of that also to kind of come to is, you can be inspired by code. So one thing I like talking about is continuous data integration. So continuous integration in software, if people are not familiar with it, is the practice of every time you make a change to the code, pretty much, you integrate it, you run tests on it, you automatically run your test suite. Every time, I would love a world where every time someone is pushing some data into some system, that data is validated as part of the practice. It doesn't necessarily mean it's blocked on it, but it means if it does fail the basic test, you get some report on it. And that's something we could do today. We do it in frictionless data. We actually have a system. You can even plug it into GitHub. You can push CSVs to GitHub and kind of automatically, like you have with code testing, a report of like your data failed the test or not. This is at the level of syntax or tidiness. Are there blank rows and columns? And is this column, which is supposed to be a date, actually a date? But you wouldn't believe it. I mean, just to go back a few years, I did a lot of work with open data with the UK government, and it's now, I don't know if it's still up to date, but there was a point they were supposed to publish finance data, like spending data in CSVs with about 8 columns. And out of about 2,000 CSVs, not one of them actually managed to comply with the basic standard of what they had the columns in the right order with the right names, with the right data, pretty much in 2,000 CSVs on that. It was incredible, right? And so continuous, and what I'm getting at is the tooling, continuous integration, continuous data integration. You want automated tooling validating technical quality. That will have a huge impact. And it's often, and also even on educating users. many users who are pushing data, particularly in public administration, are not necessarily always expert. They might be uploading an Excel file or whatever. If you've got good feedback from those systems, you can kind of educate the publishers quite rapidly. They want to publish good data, but the feedback, and you don't have the time and resource to kind of do data training, but if you have that in your tooling, you can give good error messages and so on. So I guess what I would say is, have some way to automate validation and other tools that help you publish good quality data. Focus on tidiness and syntax to some extent at this point. Semantics, absolutely, if you've got it, go for it, but that would be a huge win. And adopt best practice from software, which is continuous data integration. The other is user-driven work. When you're doing this stuff, have real use cases you're applying it to and see how that's going. That's much more exciting and much more effective. So that would be agile. So even including rough consensus and running code, we can have specs rather than standards, which we iterate on rapidly with the tools. Excellent.
Thanks, Rufus. And obviously moving to Ruben. Now, one question building on this, Ruben, you talked about a read-write data reuse. And I wonder how this merges with the concept of dynamic validation, where you validate data every time you transfer it, basically. We are used to think of data reuse as we have a data holder passing the data and we have a data reuser. But what we are looking at now, and also this morning in the presentation, in the keynote speech, we're talking about platform, we're talking about sharing, we're talking about not a linear flow, but an iteration and a double-sided flow, data that go in one direction, then come back validated, and so on. So is this a real, genuine relation with your concept of read-write that you said in the beginning? And what does it mean concretely for the data spaces?
So when it comes to these topics, there's this principle I really like, which is called the paradox of freedom. Simply said, we can only be free if we stick to rules. So this means concretely that I can take my car and I can drive wherever I want in mainland Europe, if I stick to the right-hand side. If I want to drive left, I'm not going to get anywhere. So this point to show that it's possible to have a tremendous degree of freedom, in this case, like in how you read data, write data, and so on, but you have to stick to some basic rules. So the bigger question is like, what are the basic rules? What are the things that we all have to agree on? And what are the things that we only need local agreements on? For instance, there's different traffic laws here in Belgium and France, but they're more or less similar, right? So we agree on the big things, and the other things we can just arrange locally. So that principle, to me, can also be done for reading and writing data. So regarding validation, it's also the big question of like, valid is one thing, but I think we need to step away from just valid and go to like useful. When is data useful? How can we make data maximally useful? And I see thumbs up already from Rufus. And so we think like again. And for me, what's really important there is indeed so the enablement, like through tools and so making sure it happens, but also have data level agreements in the sense that, for instance, if we really want interop, we also need shared identifiers. So from my perspective, you can ask like, what are the core tasks of data maintainers in public administrations throughout Europe? And for us, we think about like publishing base lists of the relevant entities. So it's not just about reusing the column name then, but also like have shared identifiers, have a shared understanding, because ultimately the heavy term of semantics really means shared understanding. It is a whole minimal rule set, like what is the minimum of shared information, shared understanding that we need. And if you can explain the shared understanding to a machine, it can do a lot of the boring work in our place. This is what we're really ultimately talking about.
So really got a lot of input on the need for a proportional action, good enough, we said not perfect, we said sufficiently, but not too detailed, use cases driven, user driven. So driven, probably modular depending on the different reuse cases. Now, let me move, and I reiterate the request to the organizer. What time do we have to finish? I had, is it okay in 3 minutes? So just a couple of questions coming in, and that I want to raise. One for Heather. It's about open scientific data, commenting on a sentence: the perceived effort for data preparation for sharing by researchers is one of the main barriers for data sharing. So there is an issue here about the cost of data preparation and who bears the burden. And another question on best practice in detailed data management plan, if you have recommendation of detailed data management plans throughout the data lifecycle for the EU data space. And finally, one for Rufus, what about writing test first and collect data? I hope these are clear enough for an answer, and maybe come back to Heather.
Dear colleagues, can I just throw a word in, because I hadn't understood actually, my data layer was not connected to yours, because you were asking how long. So maybe we can make this the final round and then we cut it off for today. Thanks.
Heather?
I think, if I understood it correctly, it's who bears the burden, and then that was in particular context of scientific data, so research data and etc. I mean, it's a huge issue we have here in Norway, and I think I'd like to expand that as well and say it's not just about research and scientific data, but it's also who bears the burden in the public sector too, because always the user gets the benefit, it's not the provider of this data. And this is something I think that the forthcoming strategy or the white paper for Norway is going to deal with, is how do we incentivize this? Because we need to incentivize this in some way, and I'd like to see that happening as well in the European level. I don't have specific solutions, but it's certainly a big question, and I do think that it's not just for the scientific community, but also for the public sector.
Rufus, the question for you, what about writing test first and then collect the data?
So I think I sort of make things trying to think very concrete. I mean, data systems with an organization of all kinds of scale. I mean, one thing I noticed, and I've been a big fan of for a long time, is kind of, and I mentioned, was reusing software infrastructure. And obviously, I've noticed a lot of people publishing, for example, data on Git into Git and GitHub, as versioning data that way. I mean, for example, large amounts of COVID data have been published that way. And in fact, actually, we curate a whole kind of big data set that way for people. We've been doing that for about 8 or 9 years, or actually, I've been doing it for about 13 years. That did it in Subversion before that. So I think one of the reasons I'm trying to say that is that so yes, you can write tests, but you want some way that they're going to be automatically run. I mean, just to say these things kind of go together. You want to think in your own organization, how is data flowing, and where are you going to intervene with testing that? So take the example. I don't know the details of the UK COVID example, but in a perfect world, that Excel file that came in every day would get, even if it was put in, Git is a bit sophisticated, but it's into some system where there's some trigger every time it's getting uploaded. And yes, at that point, you would have some pre-written tests that would say, for example, we expect this many cases a day, and if we're outside of that range, it's not necessarily wrong, but, some alert should happen. That would be great, like test-driven data development, you could call it. I think would certainly some data is just getting published, but particularly when data is getting consumed. And in a real world, in a certain way, you kind of want data production to be driven by demand to some extent, by use cases, at least tidying it up. That would be very, very powerful, I think. So in that sense, it would be this thing you could start doing. You could write basic tests and have them run. And what I'm also trying to say is also that overall, there's a sort of mentality, what I'd like to call like agile data, or that we start to adopt some of the kind of mentality we had in software. It's like automation, automated testing, but also things like version control. I mean, that's a really hot topic, certainly in data science at the present, but in general, like how do you want to move out of a world of like Excel copy, like today's version of Excel, and you copy this over and you have the new, because these things sort of fit together. It's hard to do automated testing when you can't track changes, or you can't see what happened, or you can't go back and find when did this bug arise. And so I think, just to kind of emphasize the end, this quality I think relates to adopting of a kind of new mindset, a more agile data mindset that would kind of apply in the whole tool, generally across the tooling, with tools that we have, simple tools we have from software and elsewhere that we could apply and adopt. So that's it. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much.
And that's
Ruben,
it, I think.
Yes, thank you very much. Ruben, last word to you before we give back the floor to
I'll make it brief. Yeah, I'll just jump back to the part of the burden, which I thought was super interesting. And I think honestly that we're thinking too much as a dichotomy about it, like it's not one or the other. Let me explain. Like usually you think that let's put the burden on the publisher because then you do it once and then solved for all the consumers. That would be the easiest. Then again, why punish those publishing data already? Because it's quite complicated. But here's the thing. What if we also consider intermediaries in the network, right? It's not just about the two ends. What if someone just publishes data, just get it out there, as we've always said, be it in CSV or whatever format, and then we can have intermediary stations improving the data, maybe developing mappings or lenses to reshape data in different ways and so on. So what I'm saying is, let's not just look at where data is created and where it ends up, but let's also think more about the pipeline, how it flows and what we can do along the way, and that way distribute the burden and make it better for everyone.
Fantastic. And with these words, I give back the floor to Max. I thank every one of the speakers and the people listening. Thanks a lot. Max?
Wow, thanks a lot to all four of you. Distribute the burden and make a better world out of it. I think this was a beautiful last work, but many thanks for the four of you. I don't know whether you will get my image, but I remember seeing these movies with my son where they were playing Quidditch. Remember this game where you fly and it's sort of like being part of a three-dimensional adventure. For me, it was with the four of you. It was like a four-dimensional adventure. It was just fantastic, and I'm very much for a rules-based society and economy. But here, it was great that we could break the rules and just continue a little bit longer. Now, I was asked also to try to say a few words on the basis of your discussion. What could be the injection into the EU priorities to coming? And this is super complicated to do, but I give it a try. So if I read you well, if I followed you well, not in all details, but in many of the points that you made, and there were plenty, I think we could say something. Could we say something like, we need to get a common, basic plumbing layer going, to stay in our terminology, so the basic rules going. We need translation and iteration permanently built in on that in order to have more freedom at the use case layers that are local or sectoral. We need to create, and this is something for the governments in cooperation with the actors, for trust and maintain the trust, and something that struck a chord with me, we need to think a lot about legal interoperability that we are not doing so much today. And this has been coming out actually during the day a number of times. And then I liked, would this be putting us on the path towards data nirvana? Do you think this is something that I could take into the conclusions of the whole event? Absolutely. Now I don't see the four of you anymore.
I wouldn't put a very important lesson is that we should not oppose rule and freedom. I think this applies to our daily world and to our data world.
I don't oppose it, but I liked a lot to say that we need basic rules in order to create the freedom afterwards to create on that. And this I find is enormously powerful and energizing. Folks, thanks a lot to all four of you. I loved it to have you with us, and I hope that this is not the last time that you're with us and that we just keep on building this trusted, rules-based, free environment for the good for all of us. Thanks a lot to all four of you. This is also, I think, quite a beautiful pitch now for our next speaker. And the next point, so because what we are having here were recommendations, ideas, sort of warning signals that came out of preeminent thinkers in data and semantics for what the EU should do and the EU should not do. And this is a beautiful, as I said, for me at least, ball that passes to our next speaker, Emanuele BALDACCI. And if I say, and if I so much put the weight on the ball, it is because he's not only the director for data and interoperability at the IT department of the European Commission, DG Digit, but he's also a fantastic basketballer and a fantastic team player. So he will know to catch the ball, and he will be all about putting it into the basket. But because he's also a statistician and an economist, I think he will have carefully calculated the risks in doing so, and in particular, the options for success that he will maximize. So, Emanuele, are you here with us?
Hello, Max. Hi, everyone. I'm really very happy for this introduction. In basketball terms, this is a alley-oop, is when one of the players is passing the ball and the other one is dunking the ball in the basket. So I will try to be as spectacular as your expectations in not taking too much of your time. But I still believe that it's important to share with you a few thoughts, because we are now in conclusion of this very nice, creative, and experimental way of doing our business. It's the first ever SEMIC conference that went fully digital for the obvious reasons of our context. And it was opened by a sparkling debate by Mario Campolargo from the Commission and Markus Richter representing the German Presidency of the European Union. I believe that they gave the right tone to this exercise. And the right tone is that we need to put the humans, the people at the center of what we do. So whatever we discussed during the day, in terms of how semantic interoperability and semantic assets can help advance in the quest towards a more efficient public administration and better services for citizens and business, we always need to remind ourselves for whom we are working and what are the values that are driving our activities. And looking at that, I believe that we are even more forced to move forward and take the opportunity that this crisis is representing for accelerating the reform in many institutions, including in public administrations, using the challenge of the twin transition of using the digital revolution and sustainability revolution, the Green Deal, to make sure that we are putting the investment to a more robust and more solid economic and social Europe, and that we are accelerating on the implementation of a vision for digital public administration. This vision is a vision that it's embedded in what we have done in the past, but that needs to accelerate on the basis of the potential for better services that new technologies can offer us. And data are at the core of these new technologies, of becoming smarter, for governments, of becoming more user-centric, of becoming closer to citizens, while preserving the fundamental values that Europeans care so much. And these values are values of data privacy, of control on the data, on human-centric technologies, including new emerging technologies. How do we do that? We have invested and will continue to invest massively in new technology building blocks, big enablers that would allow us to have a network of better computers, a network of intelligent systems powered by artificial intelligence, more secure infrastructure, more competences. But in the end, what people on the street will assess this investment against is results for them. So what new services or what redesigned services can we offer to them? And this is, I think, where the data are a key enabler. An enabler to make sure that government can get closer to citizens, can become more accountable and more transparent, and that the services, that the digital services that governments will increasingly offer are as simple to consume as the simplest and most user-friendly service that we are now getting accustomed to use. So user-friendliness, security, customization, these are all keywords for, let's say, measuring the quality of what we produce. And that's where the interoperability comes as a very strong enabler, allowing citizens and business to access digital services from everywhere, anyhow, with any devices, without having to care about the different technologies, and allowing governments to offer these services in a seamless way and building them rapidly by assembling existing building blocks, reusable solutions on the basis of interoperability by design principle. That is really the challenge for all of us going forward in the future. So what are we going to do from our end? Definitely nurture and harness this community that is your community, is the SEMIC community. We really love this community. We think that you are all a collective source of energy for Europe to develop further the chapter of interoperability, particularly of semantic interoperability. What you discussed today about sustainability of investments in semantic interoperability is crucial if we want to harness really the power of data, because data by themselves, sitting in silos, are not worth the value that they could potentially have. Once we are connecting the dots and we are integrating the data through semantics, we are really making sure that data can serve as, let's say, smart services enablers. So that's the work that we need to continue to do. We will continue to invest in interoperability assets, particularly on semantic interoperability in the next medium-term financial framework, the medium-term budget of the European Union. We will have a program, a Digital Europe program, that will be focused on deploying technologies for private sector and for the public sector. And we will look back at what we have done through our ISA² program, the Interoperability Support Program, and the European Interoperability Framework, the template that is guiding us in designing interoperability solutions. We will assess the strengths and the weaknesses in these two instruments, and we will come up at the end of next year after a very long, not long, but deep, let's say, and engaging consultation with stakeholders, including your community, with a stronger interoperability strategy as it is mandated and committed by the European Union data strategy that was released recently by the European Commission. So please continue to stay engaged with all of us, continue to build strong network and advancing the work on interoperability and semantic assets. We will continue to invest both on the technologies, but also on the people, because the people are behind the technologies and make the technology really a value for all of us. And please also bear with us in this assessment and listening journey that we are now going to start, and that will lead to, I'm pretty sure, a stronger interoperability strategy to support the reform of public administration in Europe. I would like to just use my last minute to thank all of you and thank the organizers of this conference, in particular our friends in the German Presidency that have been really very, very great in their support and to make this event happen. Also a big thank to my colleagues in the European Commission and to all of you for engaging very proactively during the day. I've been listening to interesting conversations. All of this will have a follow-up. We will not let it go, and continue to engage, please, also in the future, because this is a very ambitious journey that we want to carry out together. So thanks a lot, and back to you, Max.
Fantastic, Emanuele. Many thanks for this, and I loved how you put this together, sort of the whole day, wrapping up in one energetic and passionate call for action. Actually, so we are at the end of a long day, but we are just the beginning, just like you said, of a fantastic journey. That, in the spirit of today's conference, is not a beginning and an end once something is achieved, but that is a continuous approach to maintenance and repairing and rethinking and improving. And I think you said it wonderfully. Many thanks for this, Emanuele. There's nothing more for me to say because you've put it up. I do some housekeeping at the very end. You thanked all the people that should be thanked. I can still thank the fantastic technical team that is around here. I can thank all the audience who engaged actively and who was out there tweeting and speaking. Don't stop. As Emanuele said, this is just the beginning. It's a new beginning. It's a continuous journey towards an improved interoperability environment at the EU level. Join our consultations, join the discussions. All the materials are available on Join Up. Keep discussing. And if you allow me, because we are sort of to come back to the beginning of the conference, we said, please, folks, keep plumbing, keep the data flowing, and keep the SEMIC community alive. We need you, we trust you, and we join up with you today and for the next weeks and months and for a connected, common future for Europe. Thanks.